Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our, what month are we in now? We're in March, to our March webinar. Really nice to see you all. I'm just going to give everyone a minute or two to get logged in. Yeah, we normally have a question, don't we, to get people going while we're waiting so we don't have the awkward silence. I haven't got one prepared tonight. So what should we say? Okay, so Easter is coming. So why don't we share in the Q&A our favourite Easter treats? That would be a nice one. What's your favourite Easter treat, Fiona?
Easter cakes that my grandma used to make, and I can't make them as well as her.
Oh, I think anything chocolate for me is it's just absolutely fine. Okay, yes, so please use the Q&A like a chat function. And if you'd like to share your favourite Easter treat in the Q&A, it would be really lovely to hear. Okay, so we're now just 1 minute past 7. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make a slow start by just doing our introduction. So let me just this. Excellent. Hopefully you can all see those slides. Please put it in the Q&A if you can't, but hopefully they are visible. So yes, welcome to our March webinar. My name is Jo Billington and I am absolutely delighted to welcome Emily at 21 and Sensory to our series of Wellbeing Hub webinars. Emily's going to be talking to us tonight about tips and tricks for looking after your sensory self. But before we go over to Emily, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Hub, if this is the first time you've been to any of our webinars, and also tell you a little bit about some other things that we have going on at the moment. So first thing is that the Wellbeing Hub is a small team. There's me and my colleague Fiona, who might be waving to you now. I can't see her on my screen, but she might be waving to you now. She's our clinical director. We also have Emma Harris, who is another clinical psychologist who works with us. And we also have our administrators, Charlie and Claire. And the aim of the Wellbeing Hub is to build an inclusive community of autistic people and their allies, to work together, to think about thriving and flourishing in childhood for autistic children and young people. And if you want to find out more about what we do, the best way of doing that is to sign up to our monthly newsletter. And you can do that by emailing autism@reading.ac.uk. There's also our website and our YouTube channel, where we publish a lot of recordings of our webinars when we have permission from our speaker to do so, which we do have tonight. So thank you, Emily, for that. And also the Wellbeing Hub is funded mostly through donations. So if you would like to make a donation to support our work, you can do so here. I appreciate you can't click on these links on your screen, so I will be putting links to all of these repeating all of these things in the Q&A in a moment when I hand over to Emily. We also have a new Facebook page as well. So if you are a Facebook user and you would like to follow us, you can follow the QR code that's on your screen now, or I will also be putting a link in the Q&A in a moment. So we'll be updating that regularly with the things that we're doing. And one of the things that we have coming up for those of you who are parents or carers of autistic children and young people, and you live close enough to the University of Reading that you can attend an in-person event, you would be very welcome to join one of our parent carer meetups that we run each month. The next one is actually next Thursday, the 19th, where we'll be welcoming our guest speaker, Olive Kayongo, who is a neurodivergent mother of autistic children. And she's going to be talking about navigating mental health services for your autistic child. And she's going to be sharing her parents' perspective of doing that. And that's running from 7 till 9 p.m. next Thursday evening here at the School of Clinical Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences. Again, you can follow the QR code, but I will put a link in the Q&A as well. We don't have a webinar next month because April is our Easter vacation, so we won't be doing that. And we don't have a webinar in May either because instead of our usual monthly webinar, we actually are running a free public event, and it's going to be a hybrid event. So again, if you live close enough and you'd like to attend in person, you'd be very welcome to, but you can also attend online. And on the 6th of May, we're going to be running this event on the theme of autistic thriving at school and beyond. And it's a special event that's being run as part of a range of different events to celebrate the university's centenary year. Fiona and myself are going to be talking. We also have our Pro Vice Chancellor for Education who's going to be talking a little bit, but we also have a keynote talk from Andy Smith, the founder of Spectrum Gaming, who's going to be talking about the guidance that Spectrum Gaming have been leading on called Barriers to Education. And he's going to be talking about that guidance through the lens of autistic thriving. Again, you can either follow the QR code or I will be posting a link to more information about that as well. So in terms of housekeeping tonight, Emily's going to talk for about 50 minutes or so, maybe a bit longer. She prefers to remain anonymous online, so her camera will be switched off throughout. We'll have about 20 or 30 minutes towards the end of her talk for questions and discussion. So please do put your questions in the Q&A and I will put as many of them as I can to Emily at the end. Apologies in advance if I'm unable to get to your question, if we'd have lots of them, but I will do my best. And also feel free to use the Q&A just to share your thoughts and any comments that you have while Emily's speaking. Feel free to use it like a chat function to, again, just reflect on what you hear. The talk will be recorded, as I said a moment ago, and the link to that recording will be sent out in the next week or two. But let's focus on tonight. And I am delighted to welcome Emily at 21 and Sensory. Emily is an autistic illustrator, a graphic designer, and a podcaster. She hosts her own 21 and Sensory podcast, where she speaks to guests from all walks of life, including authors, actors, artists, educators, activists, writers, sports teams, researchers, and scientists. And she's worked with a huge range of organisations such as the BBC, Autistica, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, as well as many universities, including Oxford, Durham, Reading and UCL, just to name a few. So I'm going to hand over to Emily now, but welcome, Emily. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and over to you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Okay, hopefully that's working. Hi,
yeah,
everyone.
That's fine.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my little talk. So yeah, it's going to be on tips and tricks for looking after your sensory self. And Joe's given me a really lovely introduction, so I'm not really sure why I did a slide, but doesn't matter. I'll still go over a few bits. So as Joe said, my name is Emily. I am autistic. I was diagnosed aged 25. I'm now 31, in case anyone wondered, and I'm also dyslexic. So I was diagnosed aged 19 at university. I have a first-class graphic design degree, and I have worked as a graphic designer and illustrator for 10 years. So 21 and Sensory is actually 10 years old. And as Joe said, I have a podcast that I host and produce where I speak to guests from all kind of different walks of life. And then a little bit more about me. I have 2 younger siblings. I have a sister and I have an adopted brother. And my brother has diagnoses of FASD, autism, and ADD. And they've both actually been guests on my podcast. So if anyone would like to hear about my life from another perspective, feel free to listen to those episodes. I just want to kind of start this talk basically with a bit of background as to what 21 and Sensory is, because it started out life as a blog at a time when I was really struggling sensory-wise. So 10 years ago, I was aged 21, so that explains the name, because people do ask me about the name. And basically it's something that has grown and evolved with me ever since. I started the blog and later my podcast and social media with the aim of bringing people together to discuss their sensory problems and how they cope with their everyday lives. At the time, I was really struggling to find any websites or blogs that weren't based around babies and toddlers. Not that I'm knocking that at all, but I was really keen to find other young adults who had grown up and still had the same sensory issues, because I felt just like nobody was like me. I was also at the time unaware of being autistic, and that came 4 years later. And then a little bit of a disclaimer. I just want to be super clear that before I get stuck in, that unfortunately, I don't have all the answers, /tips, /tricks, and coping mechanisms when it comes to all things sensory related, although I really wish I did. However, in the 10 years since I started 21 and Sensory, there are definitely some things I've picked up along the way, which I will share with you today. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge that looking after your sensory self is such an ongoing battle, and it isn't easy and can mean a lot of trial and error. But I am constantly learning from my own experiences, and that's what I'll be sharing from today. And I will be discussing sensory issues within the kind of context of autism. So this is a quick overview of my talk. We've done the introduction and a bit of background. So I thought what I would do is break down like all 8 senses and then just discuss the kind of hypo and hyper sensitivities and what those are. And then I'm going to discuss how the world isn't very sensory friendly and how important it is to put your sensory self first. And then I am going to be going over sensory overwhelm, overload, burnout, shutdown, and meltdown, which are all words that are used after the word sensory but can kind of overlap quite a bit. So I'm going to be kind of myth busting those. And then I'm going to talk about masking and stimming, and then my 10 sensory tips, and yeah, conclusion and a Q&A. So I should probably get cracking. And of course, because it's me and I'm an illustrator, there will be drawings on every slide. Also, some slides might have more text, but that's really for me. I promise to read out the text. It's almost like a script for me. So don't worry about reading the text and the images. Okay, so I am going to go through a breakdown of the senses quickly. So the 8 senses that we all know, but for a lot of us autistic sensory beings don't love, are visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoceptive. So these make up all of the 8 senses, and then I want to break them down in a visual way. So within my own lived experience, I have created these 8 different drawings for each of the senses, which I have shared on social media. And the kind of ticks and the crosses are the sort of pros and cons that I've found especially, but I know a lot of other people who have sensory issues find quite difficult about each sense. So, for example, if I start with the kind of sight side of things, so the kind of good bits in terms of sight and visual processing for me are things like mood lighting, clean and tidy spaces, visual stims and fidget toys, and I'm also a lover of sequins. But on the flip side, things that I really struggle with are kind of different brightness of screens, fluorescent clothing, which I will come on to later, really colourful shelving in shops, and also things like lights flashing, sirens, cameras, that sort of thing. And then moving on to food, I think a lot of people can understand that sometimes things are too sticky, too chewy, or too painful in terms of spiciness. But also a lot of sensory people struggle with just odd texture and also sound of food. So a lot of autistic people have safe foods, so they're kind of go-to foods, which might be quite kind of bland. Like for me, if I could eat cereal all day, every day, I would, but apparently that's not a balanced diet. But cereal's always the same, and a lot of food is different each time you cook it, for example. And yeah, you can see I've kind of put in like the smooth and bland taste of avocados for me. I like because I know it's going to be the same each time. So moving on, here's some examples of some smells and scents and odours. So for me, I really like natural kind of fruity smells and, you know, being outdoors in nature and the sea. And as an illustrator, I just love the smell of pens. But on the flip side, there are some really strong smells that I cannot deal with. So cooking smells, the way that kind of smoke kind of sticks to hair and clothes. And I struggle so much with smell. I would say it's one of the most kind of the sense that I struggle with maybe the most other than sound. And I'll be kind of discussing that a bit later on. And then in sound and kind of auditory processing, things that I love are water flowing, musics and podcasts. Obviously, if you have your own podcast, you tend to like podcasts. I love the sound of nature, and as an autistic person, I can't recommend noise cancelling headphones enough. But the things that can really get to us sensory beings are things like surprise noises in the form of children and fireworks and alarms, and also repetitive sounds. So things like, you know, sirens and things like that are really loud and overwhelming. Building work, that sort of thing, you know, where it might not be great for a lot of people, but for an autistic person, it can ruin your entire day, not being able to focus at work because there's some building work outside. And then next up, I am looking at vestibular, so that's the sense of movement. So I'll be talking a little bit about sensory diets in a little bit, but basically things like motion and rocking and sports are things that I love to do with the vestibular sense. Kind of stimming and rocking are really like calming and feel very therapeutic. But that means on the flip side that a lot of autistic people can struggle in terms of being quite clumsy and struggling with their timing. So do not get me started on escalators. I cannot time myself walking onto an escalator for some reason, and very just kind of just tripping over everything, even when things aren't there. And then proprioception. So things that I love about that are kind of when I'm engaging my whole body. So like climbing, or if someone's giving me a tight, like reassuring hug, or like weighted items as well. But that can be on the flip side, things like my posture, my hand grip, and learning new skills like learning to drive or rollerblade can be really tricky. So basically, what I want to show here was that there are so many pros and cons, and things like, for example, the next one is interoception. So things like sensory diets and grounding exercises can be really helpful in terms of like connecting with your inner self and your sensory self. But then things like being very sensitive to pain can be really a big struggle. Also, never feeling full can be quite tricky. I have this thing where when I'm at loud restaurants, I can't tell if I'm hungry or I can't tell if I'm full because I'm so overwhelmed by sensory information that I think my brain can't order like it all properly. So it's hard to know if I'm hungry or thirsty. And then kind of going on to touch, I think a lot of autistic people will be behind me when I say that fidgets and weighted items are just the best. But unexpected touch is not. And labels, I think most of us can get behind the idea that labels are not okay in clothes. None of us like labels in clothes. So all of that is to say that that can be a hell of a lot to handle. So let's go into what hyper and hyposensitivity is. So hypersensitivity means that you are much less sensitive to input than other people, and it's sometimes referred to as undersensitivity. So there are many times when people can receive too much or too little sensory input, and stressful situations can make a person more or less aware of this sensation. So, like I said previously, not knowing if kind of I'm hungry or thirsty. And this can also have an impact on alertness and focus. So a person can be over and undersensitive within different senses, so it can be a little bit confusing, or they can be just right depending on the state of their nervous system and the situation that they are in. So a person who struggles with hypo-responsivity might not notice sensory inputs and may become bored, frustrated, or distressed by too little sensory input. This may lead to more intense sensory experiences in order to receive more input, and they might not feel pain or change in temperature, which you can see by my little drawings. And a person may appear to love a sensation, such as enjoying loud music or, say, strong spicy flavours, but on the opposite side to this, they may not respond at all, like they might not notice a smell or a sound that others can, or they might not be able to feel their own body. So some examples and some things that might help are things like movement, such as pacing, stimming and rocking, weighted items, which I'm a big fan of, like blankets, lap pads and jackets, having varied food options that include intense flavours and different textures, and spaces that are arranged to reduce the likelihood of bumping into hard surfaces, as well as sensory stimulating toys. And then hyper-responsivity. I have to be really careful that I say the right one because they're so similar, especially to a dyslexic person. Hypersensitivity means that you are much more sensitive to input than other people, and it can be referred to as oversensitivity. So I like to think of them as like over and under, because otherwise hyper and hypo, they're just so similar to a dyslexic person. So it may avoid or become irritated or distressed by too much sensory input, and too much input can lead to sensory overload. And we'll discuss a bit more of that later. But the struggles may include discomfort of being touched, being sensitive to certain fabrics and labels, disliking hair washing and hair brushing, and disliking certain textures of food, but also experiencing heat, cold, and pain differently. So a person may experience more of a sensation than most people, which can feel very intense or uncomfortable, and therefore respond differently, like covering their ears when there's a loud noise. This is actually something I remember my own brother doing when he tried to dry his hands in a public toilet, and he ended up putting his wet hands over his ears because the hand dryer was so loud. And I don't think we kind of understood it at the time, and I also didn't realise that obviously I'm autistic, so we're very much like, well, why have you done that? But it makes so much sense looking back on it. Being oversensitive can lead to physical pain, such as when being lightly touched, and oversensitivity can lead to difficulties managing emotions due to sensory overload, feeling overwhelmed, anxious, and difficulty thinking rationally. So yeah, lots of different things there. Things that might help are wearing noise-cancelling headphones, dimming the lights, having varied food options to match someone's food preferences, wearing sunglasses, utilising walled or sectioned off workspaces for easier control over the environment, using unscented products, and ensuring environments are as fragrance-free as possible. So, you might have gathered that the world isn't very sensory friendly. And existing in a world that's not set up for us is very tricky. Every bit of life is sensory. From school, so let's think primary school, there can be kind of crowded playgrounds, corridors, school bells, fire alarms, lunch times that just feel very chaotic with lots of screaming children in the playground. There can be changes in teachers and seating plans. There can be busy and bright display boards, and also just so many different smells, from sweaty changing rooms all the way to, lunch hall smells. And on to secondary school. Again, lots of bright displays, really itchy school uniform. For my entire secondary school experience, I had to wear a t-shirt under my school shirt because I just could not cope with it. And again, things like smell when there's lots of teenagers around. There is just so much sensory input when it comes to school. And I always thought, right, when I get out of school, it'll be better. And then you get to work, and offices can also be a sensory nightmare. And I'm going to come back to offices and this image in a bit. So I'm just gonna quickly gloss over that. But even things like events and holidays and occasions are overwhelming. Things like Christmas and Halloween, like every bit of life is very sensory. For example, with Christmas, I tried to do this post saying, what makes you happy, and like it's okay to say no to events, and like don't feel pressured into eating or drinking things, because it can be really hard around kind of holiday seasons, and especially around Halloween and November, the dreaded fireworks season. And yeah, just hating the concept of, going to experiences to be frightened and scared is a concept I will never understand. But yeah, these are just kind of a few examples. But all the way to kind of going into shops and cafes, like it doesn't have to be an event or an environment like a school. It can be the everyday things like doing your supermarket shop, and you're desperately trying to find a product on the shelf, but you can't because it's so colourful. Or there's background music and tannoys and a million different smells because there's a fish counter and a cheese counter and all of these things. And like on the right hand side where I talked about cafes, there's just so many different forms of sensory input coming in. And it's really hard to filter, and it's hard to exist in this world constantly, and especially not to go home and like flop immediately. It's very hard to keep up the energy. So basically, every bit of life is sensory, to even the very normal daily things, like I've mentioned, like visually crowded or cluttered environments, things that are patterned even can be like visually loud is a way I describe it, which is kind of a bit of a mix of the senses, but also sound, like loud speech and music. And I know a lot of autistic people struggle with the electric kind of humming and buzzing noises that other people just cannot hear, but we can hear 24/7. So yeah, some of those things are on the right hand side, and as you can see, hand dryers feature. So I've already mentioned not getting on with those. And yeah, things like touch that I've mentioned as well. So fabric textures, clothing, furniture coverings. For example, I take my own detergent everywhere I go. And it was once discontinued, and I was just inconsolable, because it's my entire world. It's how things smell and how things, need to be. And that change just sent me over the edge. But yeah, this extends to things like smell, like perfumes and deodorants that people wear, cooking smells, flavours, textures, temperatures. I've kind of gone over those already. But this kind of leads on nicely to sensory overwhelm, overload, burnout, shutdown, and meltdowns. I know that's a lot, so I'm going to break them down. So, sensory overwhelm or overload is where one or more of the body's senses becomes overstimulated. So the brain is unable to process incoming information. So I liken it to not being able to filter my senses. So they're just coming in all at once in a mess, a jumble, which is really disorientating, distressing, and it can be really hard to understand and pick up on that's what's happening. whereas burnout is a state of extreme physical, mental, and sensory exhaustion. It's often experienced by neurodivergent individuals following prolonged exposure to sensory overload. So kind of think of it, burnout, as a step up from sensory overload. Common triggers include loud noises, bright lights, crowds, or strong smells. It can cause distress, anxiety, and can potentially lead to shutdowns or meltdowns. So, for example, working out escape routes and the nearest bathrooms to hide in is one of my specialities. So, shutdown versus meltdown, like what are the differences? So, a shutdown is an involuntary internal freeze response to severe sensory or emotional overload, which is common in autistic individuals. Shutdowns involve withdrawing, becoming quiet, non-verbal, or non-responsive, and the nervous system can shut down to protect itself from overwhelming input. A meltdown is an intense, uncontrollable reaction to overwhelming sensory input, so noise, light, crowded places, or emotional overload. Also, it cannot be stopped by reasoning or rewards because it's not a behaviour, and both ideally require removing environmental triggers. So if someone's having a shutdown or a meltdown, it might be best to remove the person from the environment to provide a calm and safe place and a quiet place, most importantly, to recover in. So let's get back to workplaces for a little bit because I have many thoughts and I promise not to get too ranty. So, my own experience. So, examples from when I worked in an office. So, I wish more people understood that adults have meltdowns. I have sensory meltdowns, less frequently than I used to, which is good, but I still have them. I will become so overloaded by something, like a loud noise or a change in routine, that's enough to set me and my emotions on edge. It's hard to manage my emotions when this happens, and there's only so long I can bottle up how I feel before I need to cry. I used to regularly escape from the office I worked in to take regular loo breaks just to escape to a quiet environment, even just for a little bit. I even had a toilet escapes highlight on my Instagram documenting these escape missions. I really struggled to process too many things at once. For example, if people ate their lunch at their desk, which is totally allowed, not a crime, but it is when they bring in like really smelly, for example, fish. The smell would take up more of my brain's processing power as it's trying to come to terms with a new smell, but I'm in a familiar environment, and it would actively distract me from my work. Again, this might be a time when I would need to nip out to the loo if it becomes too overwhelming. I couldn't stop people visiting my desk, and my desk was positioned with my back to where people would approach. So my mum actually cleverly suggested putting a mirror on my desk so I could see who was coming before they got to me or tried to touch me on the shoulder. If anyone needed my attention and I had my headphones on or was busy typing, they never used to understand why I'd ask them afterwards to please not touch me. It always made me jump if I was touched on my shoulder to get my attention, and will also make me feel very sensory and feel uneven on one side of my body, to the extent that my family know that if they touch me on one shoulder, they've got to do it on the other side and make things good again. If people could have stood in front of me or waved a hand at me, that would have been great. Like I became good at people noticing that I had headphones on and people walking past me. And I also, became good at kind of seeing people loitering behind me. And also in this office, someone once patted me on the head because I had done a good job in a kind of office bantery sort of way. And it was horrible and it wasn't okay. And I don't understand people. I also found bright colours in the office I worked in super distracting and visually painful. For example, many people used to hang their fluorescent bike jackets on their hooks by their desks. These jackets, although safe and a great idea while cycling, are visually brighter than the sun to a sensory being like me. The neon colour screams at me visually and can make it hard to work at my desk if it's in view. So For me, I'd appreciate if people could store their jackets under their desks or in their lockers, which is definitely a quick thing to solve. Horrible strip lighting. Need I say more? Noise. It's constant. I used to sit at my desk with my earphones in so I could be slightly aware of my surroundings but could also play bath running tracks to drown out most of the office sound. I had a desk phone on my desk, that kind of makes sense, but when I started initially, it was there, and then I had to move to another desk a few weeks later. Neither desks were ideal, but let's just say all my correspondence from that point onwards occurred via email, and the telephone was miraculously, unfortunately, left behind. I think it's so hard to disclose being autistic and having sensory issues in a workplace. It's scary because it feels like a really super private thing, and there's so much stigma and misunderstanding when it comes to disability in the workplace, let alone the everyday cliquiness and toxicity in workplaces. I once left an office job despite loving the role because I was not deemed to be promotable due to my black and white thinking and lack of leadership skills. The manager knew about my diagnosis, which I reiterated back to them after the black and white comment, and I wasn't even managing anyone, so I didn't need to be a leader. You'll be pleased to know it only took me 10 years of desperately trying to fit in by masking 24/7 and just about scraping by in offices to finally take the leap and go freelance. So shout out to the friends and family that got me to and through this decision. Moving on. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. What is masking? Masking involves trying to hide being autistic so others will accept us. It's also referred to as camouflaging. This means we act in ways that other people will think we are normal and to try and be accepted socially. The next few illustrations include a few examples of trying to mask. They involve copying people's behaviours, actions, gestures, posture, facial expressions and tone of voice, suppressing stimming and bottling up your emotions and feelings until you're in a safe place, overthinking how you had appeared or acted in past conversations and always monitoring yourself, working out escape routes and bathrooms to hide in, constantly avoiding all the feelings, scripting conversations and responses, and struggling with the constant internal monologue. You can be constantly forced to put on an act or a front or a mask in order to appear normal and fit in. It's actually really tricky because a lot of the time you are told that you don't look autistic or you can't have sensory issues because, you're an adult. But trying not to zone out of conversations by forcing yourself to pay attention and staying present is another way that I think a lot of people mask in the workplace, but is so taxing for autistic individuals. So this is kind of a roundup of all things masking. So there's a lot of copying, mimicking, trying desperately not to go nonverbal, bottling up anxiety, thoughts and stims, trying desperately to focus on conversations and just trying to act normal, whatever normal is. And this can lead to autistic burnout and something that I refer to as a sensory hangover. So basically just the kind of after effects of having to suppress all things sensory. An example from me. Over the course of my life, I feel that I have perfected the art of masking, which isn't necessarily a good thing. I am extremely good at withholding my feelings and emotions and bottling them up until I get home. For example, I would cry when I had to go to primary school each morning, and bribes/rewards for going 5 days in a row without crying or getting upset to leave my mum were definitely a thing. If we speed forward a bit in time, I'd come home from secondary school each day very tearful. I even used to cry up in the Senkos, so special needs support room, at break and lunchtimes because secondary school is quite literally the most overwhelming place I've ever had to cope in. I also remember one day I was sat crying in the Senko's room. She allowed me to use the room if I needed to, as none of my fellow kind of students knew my struggles. And my English teacher walked in, having just taught me in the last lesson. She literally could not believe I was sat there crying because she'd just had me in her lesson. And I think this comment was a testament to the sheer level of masking I was probably keeping up at the time. I kind of also hope it reminded her that you never really know what a student might be going through, either at school or at home. But yeah, she just couldn't fathom the fact that, I was in her class and now I wasn't okay. But slowly through sixth form and university, I began to build up resilience to the world. And although I still get overwhelmed, I can always come home, have a bit of a sensory meltdown and a good cry, and then move on with things. I think I've accepted that socialising will always be hard for me, and I think I will always cope with the world like this. I have to actively remind myself that normal isn't real and that masking is an autistic and sensory way of coping with the everyday. To go out in the world and just exist is a huge thing, and so many people have to suppress who they are each day in order to fit into their environment. What is stimming? Stimming, which is short for self-stimulatory behaviour, helps a person to self-calm and process overwhelming environments. Some stims can be quite subtle, such as hair twirling or chewing, whereas others are more noticeable and can be destructive, such as skin picking or hair pulling, which can cause damage. It's important to recognise that stimming safely, whether you're a child or adult, is okay and not something to be ashamed of. I personally believe it should not be looked down on or discouraged. And there's vocal stimming. So echolalia is the external, vocal and audible echoing of phrases said either immediately or later on. It can act as a communication tool or as a stim. So I've done a kind of comparison of the struggles and also the positives of echolalia. So I'll read a couple of them out. So some of the struggles can be forced masking and suppressing echolalia to fit in. And a person might rely on favourite phrases, practice scripts and conversations, but these can get stuck in a person's head for hours or days, which can cause overwhelm and shutdowns. But on the flip side, there are positives that can act as a form of self-soothing or stimming. It can just help to repeat familiar sounds or phrases. It can help manage anxiety, sensory overload and stress. And of course, it can feel very satisfying. So echolalia is defined as repeating words spoken by someone else. But you might have also heard of the term internal echolalia. So think of it as the silent repetition in your head. This has its own fancy name, which is called echologia. Echologia, I'm not sure. So again, struggles and positives. The struggles are that it can be very hard to interrupt or notice it yourself. It happens internally and not aloud, so it's invisible, but also it takes up so much mental processing power and energy. And if you're like me, you can get stuck in loops of words, songs, or phrases for hours or days at a time. However, there are positives. Helping individuals understand complex language or ideas by looping them internally. It can act as a tool to process and rehearse information, and can provide a sense of familiarity, predictability, and safety. And it's a positive and creative part of experiencing the world. So again, the pros of echolalia: it can be really satisfying to repeat comforting words, and a lot of people have internal phrase books of their sort of go-to favourite phrases. But the cons can be one-liners that cycle in your head from TV shows and films, or song lines like from Sabrina Carpenter's songs that get stuck in your head for days at a time. Or you can't focus due to external sounds repeating internally. I really struggled throughout COVID when working from home because I could keep hearing our house doorbell going despite it not going. It was almost like this kind of phantom sound, and it's because I got used to kind of hearing it in this space that my brain would kind of fill in the sound, which was really annoying. And yeah, immediate or delayed word repetition. So yeah, that's all the examples of echolalia, both external and internal. So I thought I'd mention some of my own stims. So I definitely go through phases of doing calming things like tapping and flicking my cheek with my finger as it feels calming to me. I also stim a lot with my eyelashes and eyebrows, and I also bite my lips and my nails quite a lot. I do find that if fidget toys are not on my lap or in my line of sight, that I seem to forget they exist altogether, so I have to be quite conscious and deliberate in order to use them. I have vocal stims too. I squeak / squeal. It's my natural response when I have too much energy built up or I'm excited, and it can be hard to suppress as it's really like natural to me. And also things like repeating words that sound nice or satisfying. Yeah, they kind of get stuck in my head. And I am very fidgety and not one for sitting still. So I end up preferring to sit on the floor rather than a chair a lot of the time, which is definitely frowned upon in the workplace, I found. But I can concentrate so much better just sat on the floor. So, key tips and tricks and things that might help. Get ready for Emily's 10 sensory top tips. Tip number 1, sensory diets. And what on earth are they? Quick bit of history. The term sensory diet was first coined by occupational therapist Patricia Wilbarger in 1991. It's a carefully designed and personalised activity plan that provides sensory input that a person needs to stay focused and organised throughout the day. Now, sensory diets are led usually by an occupational therapist and consist of planned sensory motor activities scheduled throughout the day. In my drawings, I'm referring to a more modern take on a sensory diet, which could involve creating your own personalised sensory diet. So featuring things that can be comforting and calming to you. For example, when you might be nearing a shutdown or a meltdown, and it can help to self-regulate. So, creating your own sensory diet. I was taught as a child in occupational therapy a brushing technique called the Wilbarger protocol. And yes, that is the same Patricia Wilbarger who coined the term sensory diet. And it's a body brushing therapy that helps to desensitize the upper and lower limbs. Now, you should definitely do this under the supervision of an OT to make sure you're doing it kind of right and using the right technique, but there are some online guides which are useful to look into. And also, as a side note, massive shout out to all OTs, because I would not have been able to brush my teeth or hair without the support from my OT that I saw during childhood. And weighted products, there's so many out there, like lap pads, toys, hoodies, vests, shoulders, wraps, caps, and ankle weights. And they come in such a range of different textures and styles. And also special interests, when you fall down that lovely research hole via the internet or via a brilliant book. I find that I sit or lie on the floor a lot. I don't know if anyone else does. So why not carve out some time to sit with your legs up a wall, or to stim in your favourite way, or to stim dance? There's also things like safe food that you can work into your sensory diet. So having food available that brings you joy sensory-wise is really important. You might like super crunchy foods, bland foods, chewy foods, etc. Also, did you know taste input is perceived by the tongue, but how it's experienced is strongly affected by sense of smell? And things like a sensory corner. Why not create your own little sensory corner where you can chill, and it can be a whole dedicated corner in, say, a bedroom, under a desk, or based around a comfy chair, and you can really tailor it to your own sensory needs. So things like using rugs and sounds and sights and lighting. This is my own sensory corner evolution. So essentially it's a dedicated corner that I've set up in my room, but you can tailor it to your own sensory needs and include bigger things like rugs, lighting, that sort of thing. and it's kind of extended to a neurodivergent bookshelf as well. Luckily, this talk is being recorded, so if you want to come back and have a look at all the different books, or feel free to message me or email me should you want recommendations. And another thing that I suggest as a top tip is DIYing your own sensory box. So essentially you start with a plastic tub or storage box. I found that not using a lid meant that I was actually dipping in and out of it more rather than like storing stuff on top of it and not using it. So a few things I suggest putting in include fidget toys that you already have, like put a range of them in, favourite books, safe snacks, things like, I don't know, Mentos, Skittles, fruit pastels or mints. They're really good if you need some sensory input and good as a distraction. Visual stims, so anything visual like bubble and liquid timers, spinning fidget toys, that sort of thing. Headphones are always welcome in a DIY sensory box. Things like nice textures, calm scents, and soft items as well. Obviously, not everything will fit in a sensory box, so I do have a video on how I made my like sensory corner, and yeah, if you're interested in that, it's on my YouTube channel. But yeah, basically, think of it as a sensory first aid kit. You can have a small desktop one, and a larger one, for example. So I have a smaller one for my desk setup at home, but a larger one, like in our living room, that I can dip in and out of. So yeah, you can create your own sensory first aid kit. So that was quite a big tip one, but basically sensory corner / sensory diet / make your own sensory box. So tip 2 and 3 are become your own detective. So keep a sensory diary identifying patterns in you or your child's sensory experience, including triggers, hyper and hyposensitivities, times of day that you experience them, what helps you during a sensory overload and what helps with recovery, and what you might need more or less of, but also your favourite sensory inputs and also ones that you don't like. Routines or schedules, like maybe those could help. I'll come on to that in a little bit. And maybe list what activities calm you and can help to manage your sensory differences. The National Autistic Society have a really good like sensory diary download, and this is just an example one, but you fill in your sensory experience and the triggers, but you can also write down your reactions and the challenges, but also like tips for self-management and support. So I definitely recommend downloading that. They have like lots of different ones, like for each of the senses. Know your sensory triggers, and the hard part is catching them. So this is top tip number 3. As I've already covered, autistic people can tolerate certain sensory triggers for a period of time, but their ability to do so is affected by factors including being tired and having low energy, it being the end of the day, week, or school term, not keeping up with self-care, not eating properly, masking for too long, or not being in good health, and being stressed, having anxiety, depression, and other mental health problems. Also, you'll see there's a little blue label that says Emily's also trying to work on this too. This is going to feature on the tips because I don't have all the answers and I'm also still working on things. So I want to be transparent that I don't have it all figured out. Tip 4. Oh look, I'm working on this as well. The art of the mask and unmasking. It's another big one. It's one word, but when you've done a lifetime of masking, whilst not even realising it was masking, hello, late diagnosis, then unmasking is a huge task. It involves letting go of camouflage behaviours used to fit and blend in, and the focus being on self-acceptance and creating safe, supportive spaces to be your authentic self. It's a personal, non-linear and hella confusing journey that often includes identifying your true needs, stimming freely, setting clear boundaries, and connecting with neurodivergent communities. So how do you go about this? So you kind of have to start noticing situations where you feel drained, uncomfortable, or are performing for others, and recognising when you're using social scripts, hiding stims, or forcing eye contact. And as I've put here, I think recognising it can be quite tough. You can start by unmasking when you're alone, and then with trusted friends or even pets. You can allow yourself to stim and respect your sensory needs and rediscover your interests by re-engaging with passions without worrying about how you appear to others. Limit time in high-pressure social situations to avoid burnout, and trying to connect with other neurodivergent people online or in person to feel validated and safe. Tip 5 for looking after your sensory self is learning to advocate for yourself and say no. Holy moly, this one is massively underrated but huge. The fear of missing out is really hard, especially as a teen or a young adult, when all you might feel is a deep desire to fit in with your peers. Burnout after events, occasions, parties, etc. can be massively debilitating and detrimental to a person's mental health, so each event needs to be weighed up with the possible recovery time. Do the cons outweigh the pros? If so, maybe sit this one out. As horrible as it feels to say no or to bail or be flaky, is absolutely not who or what you are. You are protecting yourself and avoiding the repercussions of burnout. Tip 6 for looking after your sensory self is keeping a routine and structure. So design your own to keep on your phone, computer, work desk, fridge, like wherever. It can really help with memory and accountability and the visual reminder when walking past. Creating that sense of order, structure, and less disruption, it helps to know what's coming next, and also means you could schedule in sensory breaks into your day, and you can share this via a family shared calendar if you so wish, or on your phone, or hung up at home, so you can get different schedules with columns for each family member. And top tip, Flying Tiger has a huge range of whiteboards and daily schedule things that you can fill in, and like, why not make it fun? Why not? Tip 7 for looking after your sensory self: create your own sensory guide or manual. So a go-to for when you're feeling totally discombobulated and unregulated. You can include a sensory check-in or statement. When you can't work out why or what you are feeling, you can go to that page. And maybe you can even distribute it to friends and families, or have a version for work. And I can't recommend this tip unless I actually show you kind of what I'm doing with it. Welcome to Emily's Life Manual. I'm also working on this. So this is my collaged front page. So basically, I am an illustrator, so I make everything visual somehow. So these are some scans and photos of my pages. So things that I need to use out and about on the left-hand side. So that's a drawing of my Uniqlo bag and everything I shove in it. And it's for me to use as a reference image, as well as on the right, sensory things and support aids. Because if I don't write them down, I just don't remember they exist. Tip 8 for looking after your sensory self. I realise we're getting towards 8 o'clock, and I promise that I am wrapping up soon, Joe. Your environment. Create a sensory corner, a chill out space, or a safe haven where you live, whether it's a small room, a cosy spot under a desk. So I do feel that is a perfect opportunity to string up some fairy lights, or in your own bedroom. Make sure it's somewhere that feels cosy, safe, but not too cramped. If you don't have a space you can make your own, there's some alternative ideas on the right hand side, and you can always stick to just a sensory DIY box. So on the right hand side, there's things like a calm corner, a sensory wall, or a kind of storage room or cupboard, but just make sure it's not too cramped. And you can also get like sensory dens, or even, make a nice little sensory corner on your bed. Tip 9 for looking after your sensory self. Don't forget downtime. Relaxing is hard, especially when your senses are running at 100%, like 24/7. but you could mind map some ideas of how you can spend your downtime. And on the topic of kind of, I guess, spending your downtime on like things like gaming, it is worth saying that social media apps are intentionally hard to get away from. And I know we all know this, but the doom scrolling is ridiculously easy to get caught up in, especially when you're just looking to feel something or need cheering up or just to have a little laugh. But yeah, I thought I would mention that because I know that cozy gaming can be really nice, but also it's good to get away from screens. And also the drawing on the right was one of the drawings that I first did and first posted online. So it says a visual representation of Emily's sensory system, and touch, taste, hearing, smell, and sight are running at 100% always. But I thought it would be nice to include. And this is an example from me of things to do in the Christmas break. So I have reading, drawing, blogging, gaming. See, look, I've got screens in there as well. Diary setup, plant care, improve my people drawing, and podcasts and audiobooks. So that is a page in my Emily manual. And yeah, it was just so that my brain knew what to do in the downtime in the Christmas break, because I'm useless when it comes to holidays. So work out what truly relaxes you, and is it listening to nature or atmospheric soundscapes? A hobby you enjoy, like knitting, crochet, painting, or all of the above, or maybe a self-care evening and watching your favourite film or TV show after a bath. Tip 10 for looking after your sensory self. Setting yourself up for success. Set reminders and use visuals. Maybe it's a checklist at the door. So for example, do you have the essential sensory aids, phone, keys, meds, wallet? And make it super simple. How about a dish, which houses a range of aids that you can quickly pick up on your way out? Or have your favourite bag stocked with a portable sensory first aid kit. Also, why not include some stickers and cool pens to create your checklist? And you can make it into a new craft activity, because I'm all for crafts. And as much as I do not like AI, I do know a lot of people utilise a range of the different AI options out there to help with scheduling and reminders. An alternative that I use regularly, which is very handy, is to yell, "Hey, insert your preferred digital assistant here, remind me tomorrow at such and such a time to do such and such." It's hands-free and it's very helpful when something pops in your head and you can't write it down quick enough, or you just have your hands full. How to support someone with sensory issues. Sometimes just being present is enough. Here are some approaches to supporting an autistic person with sensory differences. Try to understand the person's sensory profile. It's okay to ask someone, but just be respectful if they don't want to go into details or are non-verbal. And find ways to reduce or remove triggers. Learn what helps when the person is experiencing sensory overload. It's okay to ask or even suggest if they'd like to go outside to remove them from the overwhelming situation. If you can, provide a safe space away from the sensory triggers, and tell the person what to expect before going to places or doing activities that may have a lot of sensory triggers. And social stories can be helpful too. Please do not judge or question an autistic person's sensory experience or need for sensory tools. Understand that sensory sensitivity and avoidance is not the same as disliking something, and exposing the person to known triggers can be distressing and painful. Having an animal or their own pet with them may help them to feel calm and manage sensory differences, and acts as a weighted and emotional support tool. I just kind of want to round this off by saying it's important to try and acknowledge all the wins, no matter if it's big or small. So if you went outside briefly, you did chores or life admin, you made a routine, you indulged in your special interests, it's really important to acknowledge the big and the small. And then this is kind of a conclusion of everything, but I know it's 4 minutes past 8. Basically, a sensory diet is key. DIY for the win. You can DIY your own sensory boxes, diaries, guides, schedules, checklists, etc. unmasking equals very hard, but it's worth the time and effort in order to be your true, authentic self. Stimming is self-regulatory behaviour, and it's a way to express yourself. But just watch out for anything, potentially harmful, and let someone know if you are struggling. Sensory struggles are very real, but if we can reach a place of greater understanding across education, workplace, and healthcare settings, the right accommodations might be offered and not have to be asked/chased for. And the environment in which we learn, work, and access help may one day enable those sensory struggles to really thrive. Thank you for listening. I've kind of credited where I've got information from. So information from Autistica, National Autistic Society, NHS England, and obviously my drawings, which is lovely because I don't have to necessarily credit them. But Q&A, and sorry that I went a bit over, Jo. Woo.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
I hope it wasn't too rushed. I was trying to fit it all in.
No, not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much. That was great. Yeah, really, really interesting. I learned lots of new things, which is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, just asking anyone who would like to ask a question or has a comment, or if anything resonated in Emily's talk, then please do put it in the Q&A, and I will post it to Emily. We have had some comments already. One person has said, I once had a work colleague who didn't hide in the bathroom, but disappeared for a smoking break when he became overloaded. Or to be acceptable for an autistic person to risk the physical dangers of smoking in order to get the calming benefits. So I'm thinking,
do you know what? I never understood that. It should be the same, I think. If not, there'd be a nice quiet indoor space rather than having to go outside.
Absolutely. So having quiet spaces that you can go to when feeling overwhelmed is really important, isn't it? We've had lots of people saying thank you, that it was a really helpful talk. We also have a comment here saying, I am ADHD. My sensory profile can be quite contradictory. I can smell mold on a sponge in the bathroom from another room before anyone else notices, yet I love the smell of blue cheese. At the same time, I have constant tinnitus, so my hearing, one of my most intense senses, never really gets a break. I just wondered what your thoughts might be about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I guess the kind of crossover between, like, I guess different types of kind of mold and, it being okay, like on blue cheese. But isn't it like kind of interesting, the kind of things that we kind of can and can't cope with, sort of things? And that, it can change daily as to what
Yeah.
kind of your sensory levels are at. So I honestly find it so fascinating to hear like what people do and don't kind of struggle with sensory wise, because it's kind of ever evolving.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that I notice with I have autistic children, and it is very much yeah, it can shift from hour to hour sometimes,
Yeah.
depending on the level of. I was really drawn by drawn to your picture of the kind of levels. You were talking about the first picture that you'd put
Yeah.
online. It always seems that, those levels seem to move sometimes so rapidly. Sometimes it can feel like there's been a change in something very quickly. And I'm always really I'm always thinking about how difficult it must be to be almost like kind of at the mercy of your senses. Have you ever felt a little bit like that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to wake up each day and not know what's going to be thrown your way, or if it's going to be a good or a bad sensory day, because it can just be one really overwhelming smell or one really loud sudden noise that can just like throw you off. So I definitely feel like I've struggled with that, and you really are at the mercy of like just how other people are and whether they're being quiet and smelly. So it
Yeah.
can be really tricky, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wondered if you had any advice. I mean, you mentioned earlier about how you had some occupational therapy when you were
Yes.
younger. Um, and I've yet to meet a sensory person who has had some occupational therapy who doesn't think it's like the most amazing thing. If you get
Hmm.
access to occupational therapy, it can just be so life-changing. Unfortunately, though, we also hear from lots of people who are unable to get access to occupational therapy. Do you have any advice for I'm thinking more about parents and carers of younger children who would really love to know more about their child's sensory profile, but maybe the child themselves isn't necessarily that aware yet, or maybe hasn't necessarily built up a vocabulary for being able to describe their sensory self. What kind of advice might you give to somebody who's trying to support their child to understand their sensory self, but they don't necessarily have that professional input to guide them?
Yeah, it is really tricky. I think through doing like little activities like creating like a sensory DIY box, you kind of know what they might be able to handle and might not be able to handle. So,
Mm,
for example, just kind of growing up, my parents started to understand that there were just certain textures I could not manage, or certain
mm,
kind of food textures in particularly that I couldn't manage. So new to kind of, keep them out of my way sort of thing. So I wonder if something like building a sensory box would help in terms of working out what your child loves and doesn't love,
yeah.
um, and having kind of different options. So, for example, like I could never manage like messy play
Mm,
at kind of nursery and primary school, and I kind of always avoided that. So, messy sensory play is just hell to me. But likewise, it might be, something that's really engaging for another kind of child. So, I guess it's really trial and error, everything
yeah.
sensory, and it can change each day as well, which doesn't help, I know. um, but I think, yeah, by building these things like sensory corners and sensory boxes, it is really
Mm.
kind of trialing what your child might like or might not like.
Yeah. And that reminds me actually, there's a charity called Cerebra, and they have a sensory library, sensory toy library that you can borrow things from,
Okay.
um, which I think is such a great idea because things like weighted blankets and so on can be really quite expensive. Um,
Yes.
and then I'm always mindful of the fact that you might not be able to kind of try out all of these different things because of access and cost and so forth. So yeah, just a shout out to the Cerebra charity who loan out those things for free for a short period of time so that you can try them, and then if it's not something that your child is interested in or that they can tolerate, then of course you can then send it back. It's almost like a try before you buy. So I just thought I'd mention them.
Yeah, that's good. And
Yeah.
also, I feel like venues are kind of becoming a bit more on board in terms of like,
Mm,
I know Westfield Shopping Centre give out kind of fidget sort of like tote bags almost, that you
yeah.
can borrow for the kind of duration of your shopping trip. So I
Oh,
do feel
great.
like there's more like short-term options as well as things like, borrowing something a little bit longer term.
Yeah.
I do feel like venues are kind of coming round to that. I think even Tesco's have trialed doing kind of fidget bags and things like that.
Mm,
So I
mm.
think it's gaining momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. Question here. Do you have any suggestions about ways to support someone who you don't know well? I'm thinking of a situation where you might not know about their sensory triggers and preferences and who may be struggling to find ways to let you know at the
Mhm.
moment.
I think it's great that you're even kind of thinking that way. Like just to know that someone wants to help is really lovely. And I think I said like during the presentation, like just being present and being just someone to sit next to sometimes is all someone might need. But I do think it's always worth saying to someone like, do you want to just like escape for a bit, or do you want to just go outside for a minute with me? Because you're not necessarily saying, are you having a bit of a, sensory nightmare there? Like, are you really overwhelmed? You're just saying like, do you want to come out with me? Almost like you were heading out anyway. So I think the way in which you frame it and say it to the person, it doesn't have to be like really sensory based language. And I think, yeah, I'm trying to think of any other sort of ways. I think just being there and being present, and maybe if they're kind of non-verbal, just saying to them like, you can put it as if you're popping out, or you're going to go get some fresh air, or you're going to go somewhere quieter because it's a bit much in here, and that just gives them the option, I think.
Yeah.
I think just giving people a couple of options is quite nice when you just cannot think straight.
Yeah. I think maybe offering too many options is adding to the overwhelm, perhaps.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, just concentrating on someone's voice is quite hard if you're in a noisy environment with lots of people and it's, different smells and foods and stuff. So you don't want to have a long conversation in that sort of environment. So the short and sweet is is the best.
Yeah. Um, I was really interested in what you were saying about, I think you said something like, I'm not very good at holidays. And you
Yes.
also mentioned kind of downtime and having a plan for your downtime. I think that's a really interesting idea. Um, y- what advice would you have for people in relation to that? Because you kind of just, I think there's this I don't know, maybe it's a very neuronormative idea, but this idea that downtime is just kind of, it takes care of itself kind of thing. But what advice would
Yeah.
you give to somebody who does struggle with relaxation and taking time for themselves and perhaps taking a step away from the kind of the busyness of every day?
I think I would say like know that you're not alone. Like it feels so like abnormal to like not be able to manage during downtime. And I used to get so frustrated at myself because, holidays are a time to like recuperate, but actually they bring a whole new set of challenges. But I think, yeah, just being kind to yourself, but also I definitely thrive off routine and having like a schedule. So I think that's why I thought, well, I can apply this logic to holidays. I can map out and get everyone else involved. So, for example, I would get my family involved and be like, can we make a schedule for the week? Like, we're away for a week. Can we make a schedule so that I know what's coming up? I know what to expect each day. We're not doing spontaneous out and about trips. Like, at least I've got some kind of forewarning sort of thing. So, I kind of feel like getting everyone to muck in as well really helps. I think the more people you can have on board, um, like the better.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel less like you're kind of making a fuss, I guess, which you're not, but it can feel very, I don't know, I feel like not liking holidays and things, like it can sound a bit sort of childish, but it absolutely isn't. Like there is so much sensory stuff surrounding holidays and new environments that, yeah, I think that should be accepted more.
Would you say that that could also be extended to like non-working days or weekends, I suppose? Could that same idea that, how does that work for you? Like, how do you, if you have your routine around your working time, do you also have a routine around your non-working time as well?
Um, That's a really good question. I think one of the very like first posts I did on Instagram, other than that thing with the faders, was about me struggling at the weekends because like you're right, I have that sort of schedule during the day. I worked 9 till 5 in an office back then, and that really worked for me. But then you lose all sense of routine at the weekends. So I think I really struggled in terms of my mental health at the weekend, which sounds really kind of odd, but it would kind of ramp up because I didn't have that safety net of knowing what was coming or what was doing. So again, I think planning ahead. I think I'm someone that always says, like, what is everyone up to at the weekend? Like, I'll check in with my parents and stuff and be like, is there anything I need to know that's coming up, kind of thing. But I do struggle with any downtime, and I wish that people understood that as adults that, you know, that happens as well. And that is a really big thing, because I wish I could enjoy my downtime, but it needs some form of structure to it for me to exist happily.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that feels really relatable. Yeah, definitely. Just a reminder, we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you have questions or comments or reflections, do feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I'll pose them to Emily. I've got so many questions of my own, which is great because I'm going to ask them. But I also loved your life manual. I've never seen anything like that. I absolutely love that. And my question, as you were talking about it, it was really clear in the way that you were talking about it that the manual was for you. Because when I first saw the picture when it came up on your slide, I thought, wow, that's great. You know, my initial reaction was that's great, because then that's helping other people know about you, your loved ones, the people close to you. And then, of course, you were describing it as it being for you. So could you expand on that a little bit? Because I think that's amazing. I'm really impressed by that.
Yeah, I think for me, I think because I'm dyslexic and I struggle with processing time and memory, I think for me, I forget the helpful things that maybe I've discussed in therapy or discussed with like my mum or something. Like, I forget the coping mechanisms like as soon as they're said, sort of thing. So I was like, I'm gonna make myself like a manual to life. Like, I know a lot of autistic people say like, oh, I wish I could have the manual to like um life, but I was like, why don't I just make my own with like kind of tips and tricks in it. Like, I have a page for like when I'm home alone, because I struggle when I'm home on my own. I always have, and I think I probably always will. But I have a page that I've kind of discussed in therapy where I can go to, and it has different kind of do this in the moment sort of things. And as long as I remember that I have a manual, it's good, it works. But yeah, it's just having that space to kind of dump all the useful things, because I can't keep them all in my head. Yeah, I definitely think there's a memory, a memory thing. But yeah, I think there's no reason why you couldn't make versions for your parents or for people at work. And something that I used to do a lot was I used to write letters to my mum, just because it was so much easier to write down than it was to have a conversation about things that were going on in my head. And I kind of feel like that in the kind of sensory sort of diary is that I can dump everything that is useful or potentially I've tried and wasn't useful. And it's just a kind of, I guess, a kind of ring binder that I can kind of add to and take away from. So again, it's something that's always evolving.
It's such a genius idea. I think it's so helpful. And you know, I think particularly for young people, the young people that I've met through my research or through some of the practice that we do here, you know, who are on that journey to, well, I think it's a lifelong journey, isn't it? But to
Yeah.
learn to understand oneself, you know, and make sense of oneself. I think it's such a wonderful idea to create a manual for yourself. Yeah, I'm really taken with that idea. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, and it
lots of
just,
things to think about.
yeah, it just feel I think also because I was the sort of child that loved doing like art projects
Mm,
at school, and
mm,
I'm like,
mm.
I can still set myself those. Like, why
Yeah,
not make my own kind of you know, that's what I was saying about like the visual schedules as well. Like, make it fun, include stickers, make it an activity, like why not? yeah, there's no rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you talked about you said, and this, yeah, you may not, you don't have to share, but I am just being really nosy now. You were talking about words that you found that you had favorite words that were really satisfying for you to stim or repeat. Would you be willing to share some of those with us? Which are your favorite words?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? Some of the ones that I actually included in that drawing are the ones that just come to me like
Mm,
naturally. So things like onomatopoeia is such a like,
mm,
I don't know, and things, I'm trying to remember what else I did in that drawing, but I think it's kind of the words that I don't know, they can kind of go up and down in tone, or um like my mind can kind of break them apart and make them sound different. So sometimes it's like really random things. It might just be like a word that I've read in a book that will get stuck in my head. Um,
yeah.
which is it's kind of really annoying and gets in the way. But sometimes equally it can be a positive because I'll enjoy going over it. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think
Sorry, I
of
probably
them.
caught you off guard
No,
there.
no, no. It's interesting, but I definitely think, yeah, there's a lot of words that I like to kind of mess around with.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always I remember back in the days when Twitter was still a friendly place. Um, my son he's always been very good at what we call neologisms, the kind of inventing new words.
Mm.
And it was such a joy when he was young because he would, the if you're in it's like a car wash and they have kind of plastic strip curtains. I don't know if you've seen,
Yes.
can you imagine
Yeah, yeah,
those?
yeah.
Well, I don't know if there's a word for those, but my son called them fluves. And and it's such a perfect, it's such a perfect word. And so even now, he's an adult now. But we still call them fluves because it just and that kind of playfulness and creativity with words and language and the melody of language. I've always, it's just always to me been seen as I've always seen it as hugely inventive and creative and joyful.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm really interested in all of that. It's one of my fantasy research projects is to kind of do a proper inventory of all of these wonderful, creative, invented words and the playfulness of words. I love all of
Yeah.
that.
Also, I feel like
Yeah.
that word, what was it? Fluves. Kind
Floof.
of, it kind of says to me the motion. Like
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and I really
You
get that.
flew through them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think also get this with movement where I like here movement sort of thing. So,
Mm,
say if
mm,
someone's running, but they're not near to me and they're running, I don't know, across a field or something, my head will kind of fill in the sound of them running. And it's kind of like
mm.
there's so much like layering of different senses and combining, and like no wonder sometimes I can't think
Yeah,
when
yeah,
there's the sound of footsteps in my head or like a weird beat to someone running. Like
yeah,
I feel like it extends to like more internal stuff as well. But
yeah.
um, yeah,
Those connections
it's
they're just so interesting.
definitely I can see why like yeah, it would be like a fantasy project to kind of look
Mm,
at motion and stuff like that.
mhm. Yeah, I'll definitely do it one day. Okay, well, we are about to wrap up, Emily. We've only got about a minute left.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I just wondered, of all the things, I always ask our speakers the same question at the end of every talk, and that is, of all the things that you've shared with us tonight, if we were just going to take one thing away with us from your talk, what would it be?
I think it would be that adults with sensory issues exist and that it's not something that just children struggle with or that children grow out of. So basically, sensory children become sensory adults. It's not something you grow out of. And yeah, you can't see it, but it's there and it's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for your comments. Lots of thank yous to you in the Q&A, Emily. Again, we don't have a webinar in April because of the Easter break, and our May event on the 6th of May is our Autistic Thriving at School hybrid event, in person and online. So please do sign up for that if that's a subject that interests you, and hopefully we'll see many of you there. But thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.